There are people in this world who carry more than anyone around them can see. Not because they are hiding something shameful, not because they are afraid of being known, but because somewhere along the way, life taught them that the most important things, the things they built themselves from nothing, the things forged in loss, the things that cost them everything, were not meant to be announced. They were meant to be lived. Marco Rivera was that kind of man. He was 40 years old, and he worked the morning shift at the Harlow International Convention Center, a glass and steel building in the financial district of a city that had long since stopped noticing the people who kept it clean. His title on the employment roster said Maintenance Technician 2, which in practice meant he arrived before the building woke up, so moved through its corridors with a quiet, unhurried efficiency, and fixed whatever the building had decided to break in the night. A lighting panel, a water pressure valve, a set of automatic doors that had developed a timing problem that no one else had been able to solve for 3 weeks. Marco solved it in 40 minutes on a Tuesday, using a diagnostic method he had learned in a country whose name most of his coworkers would not have been able to find on a map. He told no one how he did it. He went back to the corridor with his cart and continued his rounds. He had worked at the Harlow for 4 years. Long enough to know every pipe, every circuit breaker, every room that smelled faintly of mildew when the humidity climbed in August. He had long enough to know which conference organizers were kind and which ones looked through him as though he were part of the wall. His daughter Sophia was 7 years old. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's habit of tilting her head when she was thinking about something that mattered, which was most of the time. She was the kind of child who spoke carefully, who chose her words the way a watchmaker chooses a gear. Not the biggest, not the shiniest, but the exact one that makes everything else run correctly. She kept a small notebook in her backpack in which she wrote observations about the world. Not stories. Observations. The precise width of a pigeon's wingspan. The way sunlight moved across the breakroom floor between 3:15 and 3:45 in the afternoon. The exact color of her father's eyes when he was pretending not to be tired. Marco had found the notebook once by accident and read 2 pages before he understood what it was. He had set it down carefully and never mentioned it to her, because some things a father understands are meant to remain unspoken. If this story is already pulling at something in you, hit the like button and subscribe to Quiet Kind. And drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. He was just a single dad. No one saw him coming. Keep watching. Sophia's mother had died 3 years earlier. Breast cancer, diagnosed late. The way these things often are in families where no one has good enough insurance and everyone is always waiting to feel worse before they make the appointment. Her name was Elena. She had been a translator herself. Freelance, working from a small desk in the corner of their apartment, cycling between Portuguese and Spanish and occasionally Italian for a legal firm that sent her dense contract files and paid her by the word. She had been teaching Marco Italian in the evenings before she got sick. They had made it most of the way through before the treatment started, and the evenings became something else. After Elena died, Marco did not fall apart in the way people sometimes expect grief to work, loudly, dramatically, in a way that can be witnessed and narrated. He fell apart quietly, in the specific and private way of a man who still has a child to get to school in the morning. He packed his grief into something dense and carried it without complaint, and in its place he put Sophia, her routines, her meals, her school pickups, her nightmares about a woman with a soft voice who no longer came to tuck her in. He had served 8 years in the army before Sophia was born. Military intelligence. A linguist. He had been recruited at 19 because he had tested off the charts in language acquisition, the kind of result that makes evaluators pause and double-check their instruments. He had left the service with fluency in 9 languages. English and Spanish by birth and childhood, French and Arabic by training, Mandarin and Russian during 2 deployments to regions where those languages were not decorative knowledge but survival, and Portuguese, German, and Japanese accumulated in the years between, filled in the way some men collect stamps, except these were not hobbies. These were instruments. precision tools that he had used in places and for purposes that were never discussed at dinner tables. He worked at the Harlow International Convention Center because the hours were stable and the building had a small break room where Sophia could sit after school on the days his sister couldn't pick her up. He worked there because it was 3 bus stops from their apartment and 2 from Sophia's school. He worked there because his supervisor, Dennis Carr, had given him the job without asking too many questions, which Marco had appreciated at the time, and since come to understand was not generosity, but indifference. Dennis Carr did not ask too many questions about Marco because Dennis Carr did not think about Marco very much at all. "Your maintenance," Dennis had said once in front of the entire morning team, when Marco had quietly flagged a gas valve issue near the main kitchen that 3 different contractors had missed during their inspection. "Let the engineers engineer. You push the cart." Marco had nodded. He had gone back to his cart. His co-worker Patrice, who had worked the Harlow's night reception desk for 11 years and had seen everything twice, told Marco later that Dennis was the kind of man who confused confidence with competence because no one had ever made him tell the difference. Marco had smiled, the small, economical smile of a man who had learned to choose his battles with the same precision he applied to everything else, and said nothing. Sophia, when Marco told her about the gas valve later over dinner, tilted her head and said, "You fixed it anyway? Art right?" "Yes." "Then it doesn't matter what he said." She went back to her rice. The Harlow International Convention Center held between 12 and 20 major events every month. Trade exhibitions, corporate summits, government delegations, industry conferences. People arrived from everywhere: Beijing, Dubai, Frankfurt, São Paulo, and moved through its lobbies and meeting rooms with the particular purposefulness of people who had flown a great distance and had limited time to justify the expense. Marco passed through their edges every day. He refilled the paper in the printer rooms they used. He replaced the bulb in the ceiling above a table where 3 executives in identical gray suits were reviewing a document in a language he recognized as Russian, though he did not say so. He fixed the climate control in a room where a delegation from a Gulf state was meeting with a group of investment bankers from Chicago, and he did it quietly enough that neither party appeared to notice him come in or go out. This was the Harlow's version of invisibility. Not cruelty, mostly. Just the ordinary blindness of people who are focused on things they consider important. On a Thursday in October, the building was hosting the annual Meridian Trade Forum, a 3-day summit drawing delegations from 16 countries to negotiate framework agreements on cross-border investment. It was the largest event the Harlow had held in 2 years, and the pressure it created was visible in the building's atmosphere the way weather is visible before it arrives. The events team moved with clipped urgency. The catering staff had been expanded by 12 temporary hires. Dennis Carr had sent a memo reminding all maintenance staff to remain inconspicuous and to limit corridor presence near the main conference suites between 9 and 6. Marco had read the memo. He had gone to work at 5:45 as always. At 7:18 in the morning, he was replacing a faulty sensor in the corridor outside Conference Suite C when he heard the sound of heels on the lobby floor. Quick, purposeful, and then abruptly stopping. He registered it the way he registered most things, precisely, without emphasis, filing it away. A woman had stopped at the far end of the corridor, near the service entrance, and was looking at her phone with an expression that was not quite panic. Panic was too public an emotion for whatever composure this woman maintained as a baseline. But something tightly contained and very close to it. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, well-dressed in a way that was deliberate but not loud. A dark charcoal blazer, a structured bag, shoes that had been chosen for both appearance and the ability to walk fast. Her hair was pulled back. Her posture was the posture of someone who had been in command of rooms for a long time. Straight, measured, the kind of ease that is actually discipline in disguise. She was holding a document. 3 pages, printed in a font Marco recognized from 12 feet away as simplified Mandarin Chinese. She was reading it with the focused intensity of someone who understood about half of it and desperately needed to understand all of it before 9 o'clock. Marco went back to the sensor. He heard her exhale once, sharp, controlled, and then heard her say in a low voice that was not meant for him, Where are you, Diane? I need you to pick up right now. A voicemail. He could tell by the pause that followed. The Jiang delegation's amended clause is in front of me, she said carefully, her voice dropping further. I need a clean translation of paragraph 4 before the pre-session brief. Call me back. She ended the call, stood very still, read the document again. Marco finished the sensor. He lifted his cart's handle and was about to move toward the next junction when he stopped. Not because he had made a decision exactly. More because not stopping would have been a decision too, and he had never been very good at choosing indifference. He turned. "Excuse me," he said quietly. The woman looked up. Her eyes moved from his face to his Harlow maintenance uniform to his cart. The assessment took approximately 1 second. "I think you may have the wrong corridor," she said. "I don't," Marco said. "But I couldn't help noticing the document. If it would be useful, I read Mandarin. If you need paragraph 4 translated, I can do that for you right now." She looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that precedes a particular kind of sentence. "This is a legal trade document," she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone explaining something to someone who has not quite understood the situation. "It requires specialist knowledge of international commercial law terminology, not—" She stopped. "Not maintenance work," Marco said. "I wasn't going to say that." "You were thinking it." He said it without heat. He reached into his breast pocket and removed the small notebook he kept there. Not Sophia's, his own. "I'll be in the East Corridor if you need me," he said, and moved his cart forward. He was 15 feet away when she said very quietly, "Wait." He turned around slowly without surprise, because he had half expected it. She was standing exactly where he had left her, the document in her hand, her expression carrying the particular tightness of someone who has just argued with herself and lost. She was not a woman who lost arguments easily. He could tell that from the way she held the defeat. Stiffly, the way you hold something you are not yet ready to put down. "How much Mandarin?" she said. "Enough." "That's not a number." "Fluent," he said. "Simplified and traditional. Legal context included, if that's what the concern is." She looked at him again, longer this time, more carefully. He stood still and let her look, the way he had learned to let assessments run their course without trying to influence their outcome. He had been assessed by people with considerably more authority than a woman in a corridor, and he had long since stopped finding it uncomfortable. "If you're wrong," she said, "about your level, even slightly wrong, the consequences are not small." "I understand." "You don't, actually. This is a clause in a trade framework agreement involving 3 sovereign-backed investment entities and $2.3 billion of cross-border capital. If there's a mistranslation, not a misunderstanding, but an actual mistranslation in the pre-session notes. Paragraph 4 of the Jiang delegation's amended clause, Marco said. You mentioned it on the phone. Would you like me to read it or not? She held the document out. He took it. Read paragraph 4 twice, unhurried, the way he read everything. Not for the first meaning, but for the one underneath it. The standard translation would give you something like, all disputes arising from this agreement shall be resolved through arbitration in the jurisdiction of the registered party. He paused. But that's not what it says. There's the character used here, at Kai Jue rather than Zhong Kai, shifts the instrument from commercial arbitration to adjudication under Chinese civil procedure law. Different venue, different timeline, different enforceability in a third country. Whoever drafted this wanted the distinction to be ignorable unless you were looking for it. The silence that followed was the specific kind that precedes recalibration. Catherine Lowe, and that was her name, though Marco did not know it yet, looked at the document in his hands, then at him, then at the document again. She took it back. She read paragraph 4 herself, and though he could see from the angle of her eyes that her Mandarin was limited, Whatever she could parse was apparently enough to confirm that what he had said was not invented. "You work maintenance," she said. Not as an accusation anymore, and more as a person cataloging something that does not fit the existing system. "I do," he said. "How long have you spoken Mandarin?" 15 years. She absorbed this. "And the rest of the document? The other 2 pages?" "Standard boilerplate in pages 1 and 2, Marco said. "Nothing unusual. Page 3 has 1 additional clause in the footer. Smaller print, paragraph indented. Limits the review period to 14 days rather than 30. Also worth flagging." She stood very still. Then she said, almost to herself, "Where have you been for the last 2 days?" It was not a question aimed at him. He understood that. He picked up his cart's handle. "Good luck with the session," he said. "Wait." For the second time in 5 minutes. "Your name?" "Marco." "Catherine," she said, and held out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm and brief, and carried none of the performance that handshakes in buildings like this one usually carried. He noticed that. He went back to the East Corridor. Sophia arrived at the Harlow at 3:40 that afternoon, escorted from the bus stop by Patrice, who had adopted this task without being asked and considered it a reasonable use of her lunch break. Sophia came in through the service entrance the way she always did, her backpack enormous relative to her frame, her small notebook tucked under her arm, and went directly to the second-floor break room, where there was a corner chair she had identified on her first visit as the most strategically placed seat in the room. Maximum sight lines, nearest to the power outlet, farthest from the vending machine, which she had noted in her notebook smelled of something she described only as plastic ambition. She unpacked her homework. She worked through her mathematics in the unhurried way of someone for whom numbers were a comfortable language, checked her answers twice, and then opened her notebook and wrote the date and a single observation she had been saving since the morning. "The woman in the charcoal blazer looked at my father the way people look at something they expected to be one thing and turned out to be something else entirely." She had seen them from the mezzanine while waiting for Patrice. She had not heard what was said. She had not needed to. If this story has found its way to you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Quiet Kind. But your support is what keeps these stories coming, and there are so many more waiting to be told. At 4:15, Dennis Carr found Marco in the maintenance bay replenishing his cart for the afternoon round. Dennis was 49 years old and had the energy of a man who had once been told he was good at management and had spent every year since trying to remain in circumstances where that assessment could not be tested. He moved through the Harlow with the confidence of someone whose authority was specific and real within a very small geography, and he wielded it with the particular enthusiasm of someone who understood, at some level he never examined directly, that it was the only geography he had. "The conference coordinator flagged you," Dennis said, without preamble. "Someone reported that you were in the North Corridor near Suite C this morning during restricted hours." "I was replacing a faulty sensor," Marco said. "The work order is logged. I finished at 7:40. The memo said limited corridor presence near the conference suites between 9 and 6. It was 7:40. Dennis looked at the cart, at Marco's uniform, at the particular brand of patience on Marco's face, which Dennis had always found quietly infuriating in a way he could not entirely articulate. "I've also heard," Dennis continued, shifting his weight slightly, "that you were speaking with one of the attendees, a conference delegate." Marco said nothing. "That's not your lane, Marco. These are people dealing with, I don't know, international business things, high-level stuff. You understand that, right? Like you're not there to socialize. You're there to fix the building." "Understood," Marco said. "Good." Dennis looked satisfied in the way that small victories produce satisfaction. "If it happens again, I'll need to write it up." He left. Marco stood for a moment in the maintenance bay, listening to the building's ambient hum. The ventilation, the distant elevator mechanism, the particular low frequency of a structure that had been built to last and was doing precisely that, and then he picked up his cart and went back to work. At 5:47, the Meridian Trade Forum's primary session fractured. Marco was in the service corridor on the east side of Conference Suite C when he heard it. Not the content, not yet, but the change in atmosphere that a room communicates through its walls when something has gone wrong. But the particular acoustic signature of voices that were controlled 30 seconds ago and are no longer entirely controlled. He paused, moved his cart forward until he was adjacent to the doors, which were not fully sealed. A gap at the lower hinge, thin and accidental, sufficient. Through it came voices. He recognized the Russian first. Petrov, from the Moscow-based Sovereign Wealth Arm. A man whose syntax Marco mentally placed as St. Petersburg-educated mid-career bureaucratic background, formal register. Then the Chinese, Zhang Wei's chief counsel, Cantonese-inflected Mandarin, rapid and clipped. The tone not angry, but something more precise than anger. The tone of a person who believes they have been misrepresented and wants the record corrected immediately. And then the English. Multiple voices. Me, the American contingent, trying to manage the gap between two conversations they only half understood, with the well-intentioned clumsiness of people who are certain that sufficient goodwill can substitute for sufficient language. It cannot. Marco listened for 45 seconds, long enough to understand what had happened. The Zhang delegation had made a conditional concession in the morning session. A real one, specific and meaningful. The language used had carried a formal qualifier in Mandarin that indicated the concession was provisional pending written confirmation before the close of day. The American interpreters had translated it as a confirmed concession. The Russian delegation had heard it as a confirmed concession. The Zhang Council was now explaining, with increasing precision and decreasing patience, that it had never been a confirmed concession, and that proceeding on that basis was either a misunderstanding or something less charitable, and that they were prepared to consider it the latter if no one could demonstrate the former. The deal, $2.3 billion of cross-border capital framework, 3 years in negotiation, was approximately 12 minutes from collapse. Marco opened the service corridor door and walked into Conference Suite C. The room registered him with the specific quality of attention a room gives to something that should not be there. 15 people at a long table, 3 interpreters along the side wall. A conference coordinator near the back, who rose from her chair with the immediate posture of someone preparing to intercept. "Excuse me, Jan, this is a closed..." The Zhang delegation made a conditional concession this morning, Marco said in English across the room, clearly, without raising his voice. Not a confirmed one. The qualifier used was Yu Tiao Hian Di, provisionally, contingent on written confirmation by close of business today. It was translated without the condition. The record needs to be corrected. The room went completely still. He turned to the Zhang Council and repeated it in Mandarin. The same statement, precise, formal register, the specific dialect markers of someone who had learned the language in context, not from textbooks. The council's expression shifted, not warmly, but with the particular sharpening that comes from hearing your own language spoken correctly by someone unexpected. Then Marco turned to the Russian delegation chief, Petrov, who was watching him with the expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by things professionally and was now being surprised personally, and said, in Russian, without pause, the American interpretation was incomplete. This was not a deliberate misrepresentation. It was a translation error. The concession as intended is conditional and still negotiable. The Zhang delegation remains at the table. Petrov's eyebrows moved a fraction. He looked at Marco for a long moment. Then he looked at the Zhang Council, who gave a small, precise nod. The coordinator was still standing. "You are a maintenance employee," she said. Her voice had the register of a statement that is also a question that is also a threat. "You cannot..." "He's correct," said Catherine Lowe from the far end of the table. Her voice was steady and entirely final. That's on all 3 points. The concession was conditional, the translation was incomplete, and he can. She looked at the coordinator with an expression that closed the conversation. Then she looked at Marco, and for a moment, just one, brief and unguarded, something moved across her face that she did not quite manage to contain. Not gratitude, exactly. Recognition. The kind that arrives when you realize you have seen something true. Marco nodded once. He turned and walked back toward the service corridor door. He had almost reached it when Petrov said something that stopped him. Low, in Russian. Almost private. "What is your name, friend?" Marco paused, half turned. "Marco," he said. Petrov looked at him with the unhurried attention of someone filing something carefully. "Marco," he repeated. Then, in Russian, with the cadence of a man who has seen a great deal and is choosing to acknowledge it. "Do not go far." Marco went back to his cart. Sophia was in the break room when he came to collect her at 6. She was closing her notebook, backpack already on, homework already packed. She looked at him the way she looked at him when she had been paying attention to things she was not supposed to have been paying attention to. "You were in the big meeting room," she said. For a moment. Was it because of the woman in the charcoal blazer? He looked at her. "How did you—" "I saw you this morning from the mezzanine," she said simply. "You were talking about something that mattered. I could tell from how you were standing." She pulled her backpack strap straight. Did you help her?" Marco crouched down to her level, the way he always did when he wanted to speak to her properly. "I helped the situation," he said. "That's different." Sophia considered this. Is she nice? He thought about Catherine standing at the end of the table, the steadiness in her voice, the way she had said he can with the finality of someone who does not often spend their authority carelessly and had just chosen to spend it without hesitation. "I think she's trying to be," he said. "I think it cost her something." Sophia nodded, accepting this as sufficient, and stood up. They took the bus home. Sophia sat beside him with her notebook open, writing something he didn't read. The city moved past the window in the particular way it does at the end of a day. Looser, the crowds dispersed, the light going amber and long. Marco watched it and thought about Petrov's face, about the specific quality of the pause before he had said, "Do not go far," about the 14-day clause in the footer of a document that someone had hoped would go unnoticed, about the way Catherine Lowe had looked at him across a room full of people who thought they understood the situation. He thought about Elena, the way he always did at this hour, quietly and without drama, the particular weight of someone who shaped you and is gone, who lives now in the way you speak to strangers, in the patience you apply to problems that look simple from the outside, in the precise tilt of your daughter's head when she is deciding whether something is worth writing down. "Dad?" Sophia said without looking up from her notebook. "Yeah." "She's going to come back," she said. "The woman. I think she's still figuring something out, and she's going to come back to figure it out near you." Marco looked at her. "How do you know that?" Sophia closed her notebook. "Because she didn't look like someone who leaves before she understands something," she said. "And she doesn't understand you yet." She put the notebook in her bag and looked out the window. Marco was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city continued its ordinary business, entirely unaware that somewhere in a glass and steel building 3 bus stops behind them, 15 people were sitting with the understanding that the man who had just walked out the service corridor door was not what anyone had assumed, and that one of them, at least, intended to find out exactly what he was. The call came the next morning at 6:52. Marco was on the bus, not Sophia beside him with her backpack and her notebook and a piece of toast she was eating with the focused efficiency of someone who had allocated exactly the right amount of time for breakfast and intended to honor that allocation. His phone buzzed twice before he looked at it. Unknown number, local area code. He answered. "Marco." It was Catherine's voice. Clipped, professional, but with something underneath it that had not been there in the corridor. Something that had been loosened slightly, the way a window is loosened by weather. Not broken, just no longer entirely sealed. The Meridian Forum reconvened this morning. The Jiang delegation accepted the corrected record. The concession has been formally reinstated as conditional, terms to be confirmed in writing by close of business today. A pause. The deal is intact. Good, Marco said. Another pause. Longer. I owe you a conversation, she said. You don't owe me anything. That's not... She stopped. He could hear at the edge of her silence the specific internal friction of a woman who has spent 20 years in rooms where every word is a transaction and is now trying to say something that is not. I would like to have a conversation with you, she said more carefully. That's more accurate, if you're willing. Marco looked out the bus window. Sophia had finished her toast and was watching a pigeon on a telephone wire with the calm, evaluative attention she gave to things she found structurally interesting. I'll be at the Harlow by 7:30, he said. She was already there when he arrived. Not in the North Corridor this time. Not near the service entrance. She was standing in the main lobby, in the open, visible to the morning reception staff and the 2 event coordinators who were setting up for day 2 of the Meridian Forum, and who both registered her presence with the specific calibration of people who had just internally revised their assessment of the room. She was wearing gray again. Different gray. She had coffee from the lobby cart, 2 cups, and she held one out to him as he came through the employee entrance. He took it. They stood for a moment in the lobby light, which at 7:30 on an October morning comes through the east-facing glass in long horizontal bands. The kind of light that makes everything look simultaneously ordinary and important. I need to tell you something, Catherine said. Before the session this morning, before anything else happens today. Marco waited. My full name is Catherine Harold Lowe. She said it without announcement or performance, the way people state things they have stopped attaching drama to. My father founded Lowe and Associates International 41 years ago. I've run the firm for 11 years. We manage cross-border investment frameworks for sovereign wealth funds, private development groups, and 3 government-adjacent entities whose names you'd recognize. She looked at him steadily. The Meridian Forum isn't a client event. It's our event. I organized it. I've been negotiating this deal personally for 31 months. Marco drank his coffee. He did not look away. He did not look impressed, which was, she would later say, the precise thing that made her keep talking. I came to this building yesterday without my interpreter because she had a family emergency and the backup was delayed. I had a 14-page document in 3 languages, a pre-session brief due in 40 minutes, and a paragraph I could not fully parse. She paused. And a maintenance technician offered to help me, and I almost sent him away. You did send me away, Marco said. Briefly. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Briefly, she agreed. And then you walked 12 feet down the corridor and waited, which I've been thinking about since last night. You weren't waiting for thanks. You weren't making a point. You just waited in case I needed you. I had a sensor to replace on the east side. You'd already replaced it, she said. I checked the work order this morning. He looked at her. She held his gaze without apology. Why are you telling me this? He said. Because what you did yesterday saved a 31-month negotiation, and I'm going to acknowledge that properly, and I wanted you to know the full shape of it before I did. She held the coffee cup in both hands, the way she had held it in the corridor the morning before. A small, private gesture that she probably didn't know she was repeating. And because Petrov called me last night. Marco was still. He asked about you, specifically. He wanted to know your background, your name, your current position. She paused. He also wanted to know whether you were happy in your current role. In the lobby behind them, the morning continued its ordinary business. The reception desk was staffing up. A catering team wheeled a trolley toward the east wing. The automatic doors opened and closed with their corrected timing. Marco's fix from 3 weeks ago still holding. What did you tell him? Marco said. I told him I didn't know yet, Catherine said. But that I intended to find out. The identity reveal, when it came publicly, arrived the way the most important things do. Not with ceremony, but with the accumulated weight of a truth that has been present all along and has simply been waiting for the right moment to become visible. It happened at the close of the morning plenary session, which Marco did not attend. He was in the east corridor replacing ceiling tiles that had shown moisture damage from last week's rain, a job that required a ladder and a specific patience for repetitive overhead work, which Marco possessed in the same abundant quantities as he possessed most other kinds of patience. He heard it from Patrice first, who came to find him at 11 with the expression of someone carrying information she considered sufficiently important to justify interrupting a ceiling tile replacement. She stood at the base of his ladder and looked up. You need to come downstairs, she said. I need to finish this tile. Marco. Something in her voice made him look down. The Russian, the big one, Petrov, just stood up in the plenary and spent 4 minutes telling the entire forum who Catherine Lowe actually is. Her full biography, her father's firm, the assets, all of it. Patrice paused. And then he said, and I'm quoting this because Deja from catering heard it directly and texted me the exact words. The man who saved this negotiation yesterday speaks 9 languages and works maintenance in this building. His name is Marco Rivera, and in my 40 years of international business, I have never seen a more precise intervention. This room owes him a standing acknowledgement. Marco came down the ladder slowly. The whole plenary stood up, Patrice said. 15 delegations. He stood on the corridor floor and looked at the ceiling tile in his hand for a moment. Then he set it down carefully against the wall. Dennis is going to... Dennis, Patrice said with a precision that could have cut glass, is currently in his office with the door closed and the blinds down, which is where he is going to remain for the foreseeable future. Oh, because Catherine Lowe asked to meet with the building director 20 minutes ago and she was carrying a folder. Marco, a folder. The meeting with the building director lasted 40 minutes. Marco was not present for it. He was asked to come to the director's office afterward, where he sat in a chair across from a man he had spoken to 3 times in 4 years, who now looked at him with the particular expression of someone reconfiguring a great deal of prior thinking in real time. The building director said that his employment status was under review, not for discipline, for reclassification, that a formal skills assessment would be conducted, that his compensation, title, and responsibilities would be adjusted to reflect his actual qualifications, which had apparently not been captured in his original onboarding. Marco thanked him. He went back to his cart. On the way, he passed Dennis' car in the hallway. Dennis looked at him with an expression that Marco recognized. Not guilt, exactly, because men like Dennis rarely arrived at guilt directly, but its outer layer, the particular discomfort of someone who has been small in a way that is now visible to the people who matter. He opened his mouth. It's fine, Dennis, Marco said quietly. He kept walking. He meant it. That was the thing about Marco Rivera that the people who underestimated him never quite understood until it was too late. His grace was not performed. It was not strategy. It was simply the natural output of a man who had measured himself by something other than the opinions of the rooms he moved through, and then found that those measurements had held. Sophia was in the break room at 3:55, 10 minutes ahead of her usual arrival, because Patrice had called his sister and his sister had called the school, and Sophia had been picked up early, which Sophia had accepted without complaint but with heightened attention, her notebook already open before she sat down. When Marco came in, she looked at him with the full force of those dark, precise eyes, and he understood that she already knew the shape of the day even if she didn't know all its details. He sat down across from her. The woman in the charcoal blazer, she said. Not a question. Yes. Was she important? Very. Did she know you were important? Marco was quiet for a moment. She does now, he said. Sophia looked at him for a long time with the particular quality of attention she reserved for things she was going to write in her notebook. Then she said, Mom would have thought that was funny, that you fixed a $2 billion thing with languages and nobody knew for a whole day. He felt it, the quiet, familiar weight of it, the grief that had become something softer with time but never smaller, only more precisely shaped, more livable. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She would have, he said. Sophia turned her hand over and held his. I think the woman is going to be important for a while, she said. What makes you say that? Because she came back, Sophia said simply. And she brought 2 coffees. She didn't have to bring 2. She brought 2 because she was already thinking about you before she got to the building. She went back to her notebook. That's how you can tell. 3 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon when the Meridian Forum had concluded and the building had returned to its ordinary rhythm, Catherine Lowe came back to the Harlow. Not for an event, not for a meeting. She came in through the main entrance, which she did not have to do, and she asked Patrice at reception where Marco was, which she also did not have to do, because she had his number by then. Patrice told her. 2nd floor, east wing, the corridor near the windows that caught the late light. She found him there, exactly as described, by replacing a light fixture with the unhurried competence she had come to understand was not a limitation of his ambition, but an expression of his character. The particular quality of a man who does the thing in front of him completely before he moves to the next. She stood in the corridor and watched him for a moment. He knew she was there. He finished the fixture. He came down. They walked to the break room, where Sophia was at the corner table with her notebook, and looked up at Catherine with the careful, evaluating attention of someone taking a measurement. Catherine sat down across from Sophia. She did not perform warmth, which was, Sophia would later write in her notebook, the reason she trusted her. She just sat down like a person sitting down. Your father told me you keep observations, Catherine said. Not stories. Observations. Sophia tilted her head. He told you that? He mentioned it. I thought it sounded like the most useful kind of notebook to keep. Sophia considered this with full seriousness. Then she opened her notebook, turned to a page near the middle and slid it across the table. It said, The woman in the charcoal blazer looks at my father the way people look at something they expected to be one thing and turned out to be something else entirely. She is going to have to decide what to do about that. Catherine read it twice. Then she looked up at Marco, who was leaning against the counter across the room with his arms crossed and an expression that was, very carefully, very quietly, something close to the beginning of a smile. She's not wrong, Catherine said. She never is, he said. Sophia took her notebook back, closed it, and went back to her homework with the composure of someone who has made a prediction, watched it come true, and considers the matter appropriately resolved. This is what the building director noted in his formal report, when he submitted the reclassification paperwork, that Marco Rivera had been performing tasks substantially in excess of his classified role for the entirety of his 4-year tenure at the Harlow International Convention Center, that a proper assessment revealed qualifications that warranted reclassification to senior multilingual operations consultant. A role created specifically, the director acknowledged in a private email to his supervisor because no existing title was sufficient. This is what Petrov noted, in a letter he sent to Catherine Lowe's firm 2 weeks after the forum, that the Meridian negotiations had been salvaged not by technology, not by process, not by any of the considerable resources that had been allocated to ensuring their success, but by a single man with a cart and a quiet understanding that language is not a tool for managing people but for reaching them. He asked, formally, that Marco Rivera be retained as a consultant for the follow-up negotiations. He offered a fee that made Catherine's assistant read the number twice before forwarding the email. This is what Sophia wrote in her notebook, On the last page of that particular volume, in the careful handwriting of a child who has learned that precision is a form of love. My father speaks 9 languages. He fixed a $2 billion deal because someone was rude to him and he helped her anyway. Mom always said he would change someone's world without meaning to. She was right. He changed too. And this is what Catherine said to Marco on an evening 3 months later when they were sitting in the break room long after everyone else had gone home, the building quiet around them in the particular way that buildings are quiet when they are being trusted with something important. I almost sent you away. I know. Twice. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary evening. Why did you stay? He thought about it, genuinely, the way he thought about everything, without performance. Because you were trying to do the right thing, he said, even when you were being difficult about it. I could see that you were trying. She looked at him steadily, with those dark, unhurried eyes that had seen through the surface of a great many things, and were now, for the first time in longer than she could precisely calculate, content to stay with what they found. I didn't treat you well in the beginning, she said. No. I'm working on it. I know, he said. I can tell. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, carefully, she reached across the table and set her hand next to his. Not on it, not yet, but close enough that the choice was visible and real. He looked down at it, then at her. He turned his hand over. They sat in the quiet of the building he kept, the building that had never thought to ask what he carried. And outside the window, the city continued its vast, indifferent, beautiful business. He's entirely unaware that inside, 2 people who had not been looking for anything had found something they were no longer going to pretend they weren't holding. Sophia had gone home with his sister. She would ask him tomorrow morning over breakfast with the directness she applied to all important questions. Is she going to keep coming back? And Marco would say, I think so. And Sophia would nod and go back to her oatmeal and say, without looking up, Good. I've almost run out of room in this notebook. There are people in this world who carry more than anyone around them can see. And sometimes, not always, not easily, not without cost, the right person comes along and finally thinks to ask what it is they're carrying. And the answer, when it comes, is not what anyone expected. Because it never is, with people like Marco Rivera, the man who spoke 9 languages and let the building believe he spoke none. The man who fixed a $2 billion deal with the same hands he used to fix a ceiling tile. The man who raised a daughter who kept observations instead of stories, because she had learned from him that the most important truths are the ones that don't need to be invented. A person who is unseen is not invisible. The right eyes are always watching. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. The people who stay for the whole story are the ones who understand it. If it moved you, the videos on your screen right now are waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come home. Quiet Kind has a story for you.